My heroes as a young boy were Charles Lindbergh, of course, who flew across the Atlantic in the late 1920s, and I was just a very small child when that happened. And then as World War II came along, of course, we had Jimmy Doolittle, who was the only good news in 1942 with his very bold carrier attack on Japan. So all those people kind of registered with me as heroes, and that's probably how I got to become an aviator.
Sioux City, Iowa native George Bud Day began his military career in 1942, when at the age of 17, he enlisted in the Marines. He served 3 years in the South Pacific during World War II, then completed his education before returning to service, this time as an Air Force fighter pilot during the Korean War. But these experiences could scarcely prepare him for what awaited him more than a decade later on a top-secret mission in Vietnam.
My first really hard-charging combat experiences were really in Vietnam. The concept was developed to maybe take some jet fighters and go up and do this reconnaissance, target spotting, marking, calling the force in and taking targets out, using the jet as a forward air control. I got picked to go up and do that, and it was a top secret project, and it was a really hairy mission because you spent a lot of hours, a lot of time fairly low to the ground at high speed getting shot at. And so I lost 42% of my airplanes in the first 6 months we operated. And I was one of those, I might add. And I got shot down August 26th on my 67th mission. I broke up in the ejection, shot the controls out of the airplane, and it tried to do an outside loop like this, and I was about 4,000 feet, and it wasn't going to do any outside loop, and I punched us out. I broke my arm here, here, and here, damaged my knee, and my oxygen mask didn't separate right and hit me in the eye and damaged my eye, so I wound up on the ground, got my radio out, found that my arm was fractured, and got a call off and told them I was on the ground alive, and young Vietnamese popped through the brush and captured me.
Major Day was taken to a North Vietnamese camp where he was interrogated and tortured for several days, but he escaped into the jungle and managed to evade the enemy for 2 weeks, crossing the Ben Hai River into the demilitarized zone. Day was the only POW to ever escape from North Vietnam.
Came very close to making it to freedom. I was within about a mile of Marine Corps base at Con Thien when some little Vietnamese popped out of the brush and yelled at me, and I had been without food for all that time, and I was in fairly tough shape. I just said to myself, I had come this far to surrender to these little bastards, and so I took off running. They shot me and recaptured me. Took me back up to North Vietnam, tortured me pretty brutally. He hung me by the arms and wound up wiping out my arms and hands and crippled me pretty badly.
After being returned to the camp from which he had escaped, Day was moved to the infamous Hanoi Hilton.
The prison we were in was the old French prison in Hanoi. This prison itself was designed for pretty good cleanliness, but the Vietnamese defeated all of that by boarding up all of the windows. It had a pretty good sized window in every cell. And they plugged that full of matting so it went quite dark. And then it was just absolute filth. You just had rats running around, and they were on about 700 calories a day of food, so you're all emaciated and big sunken eyes, and your health was very precarious. So the living conditions were just really the bottom. And then on each one of the beds in this thing is a set of iron stocks that they're on a folding thing like this. They just whip them down over your ankles. And so, depending on how mad at you might spend being stocks for 2 or 3 days at a time without ever getting out of stocks. And they moved John McCain, who's now the senator from Arizona, moved John in with me, and he was all busted up just like I was, and we got to be very dear friends. I had some absolutely brutal torture sessions, and 2 or 3 times, frankly, I would have preferred to die as to continue that. I had one session where I took 300 strokes of a fan belt. I was in leg irons, and they were beating me with a fan belt and a couple of beaters, and I could remember counting till 300 stroke, and I just said, why am I wasting my time counting here? They're going to kill me.
Day continued to endure brutal interrogations and unimaginable conditions, but resolutely resisted his captors for more than 5 years. His conduct in the face of lethal enemy pressure was a life-saving inspiration to his fellow inmates.
The bombing came in December of 1972, and what happened was that suddenly at 9 o'clock at night, literally hundreds of bombers dropping 120 bombs per airplane were over Hanoi dropping bombs, and it was just, the earth was vibrating, the pieces of stuff were falling off the ceiling. But that was a wonderful sound of freedom, because we knew that was exactly what it was going to take to get us out of there. And I had a big, quite large building, and my people were just really ecstatic. Everybody knew we were free. So we started getting released in February of 1973. First group came out February 14th, and John and I came out in the third group on March 14th of 1973. You live with somebody for as long as we did, you build up kind of a relationship that is just indescribable. And there were 4 of us who got to be very, very tight. And before the release, it was wonderful to be getting released, but there would be a certain sadness about the fact that you were all going to go your separate ways. But we developed some friendships there that are just indescribably strong. It's very difficult to describe that feeling. You know that I had seen enough combat to know that there were certainly a lot of acts of courage that probably far exceeded what you saw yourself doing. I never really saw myself as having performed so extraordinarily that I was going to be a candidate for a Medal of Honor. So I was very humbled, and I recognized that I was getting this medal on behalf of a lot of other things and people who, for some reason, had not been recognized. We've been so fortunate by the accident of birth to be Americans, and having had that good fortune, our primary duty is to make sure that this country survives and that we stay free. That ought to be the primary objective of every American every day for the rest of their life.